Yes. Here we go.
We do.
Woohoo! Yes. Oh yeah.
Can you hear the sound? No.
I'm breaking.
Right. Great. So, good
There you
morning,
go.
Timothy. Here we
How are
go.
you
Yes,
doing?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm good. I am not on the deck of the good ship's antenna. I am inside because the wind and the howling is just so enormous today. It's not a good day for sailing, so I will be hunkered down. But I wanted to give the briefing from inside the cabin rather than outside. So I hope the sound is good. But you will notice a lot of sound from the waves hitting the sides of the boat and also the rocking back and forth. So I'll try not to get seasick.
I hope you won't. So, thank you for those trials. Okay, so it's nice to see the inside of your boat. Looks great. Beautiful, cozy, light as well. And I can see that you are also having some kind of hot drink.
Yes, Maya, today is day 9 of my 10-day detox regime. So no caffeine, no food, just fluids. So I'm looking forward to not tomorrow, but to Tuesday, actually. But thank you
Tuesday.
for sticking with me.
Well, thank you for sticking with us because it's important. I was actually worried whether you would be here today or not. So
Have you
thank you
noticed? Can you tell any difference?
very much. So yes.
Okay.
Yes, to everybody who is listening to us on Clubhouse, you can go to YouTube or LinkedIn and see how Timothy has changed over this 1 week because of the detox. What's
Yep.
that? A 10-day detox. Oh, my dear. That's really tough.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Timothy, and to everybody who is watching us or listening to us. We are here once again. This is Japanese Politics, delivered to you by Japan Expert Insights. Timothy, as you know, is a public affairs consultant. He has a consultancy firm here in Tokyo. And if you need any services in terms of public affairs and lobbying as well, please feel free, yes, to contact him and his team. That's the plug for today, for the moment. So, Timothy, the floor is yours because I know that we are not really very no, I would say that we have a limited time anyway. So thank you. Let's go. Let's
Thank
start.
you very much, Maya. This is our 107th episode, Maya. 107 Sundays consecutively we have been together, and the audience just continues to grow. It really compels us and inspires us to keep, delivering to you, the audience, what's going on in Japanese politics that's important, that's critical. So thank you, Maya, and thank you to the audience for the support and the encouragement that you give us. This last week has been pretty active. As we were speaking this time last week, the Prime Minister was just getting out of the hospital. He went in for a 3-hour surgery for nasal congestion. He had endoscopic surgery that was performed. Nothing really serious. He came out the same day and is back on his feet. A very busy week for the Prime Minister. So let's talk about a couple of things that the Prime Minister is, embroiled in or considering or involved in the dynamics. So there are a lot of big news that has come up this last week. The replacement of Mr. Kuroda as governor of the Bank of Japan. LGBTQ has taken a prominence this week as well. The trade figures for this last month are not very good, and the yen continues to suffer. So looking towards the election, the local and municipal elections in May, the Prime Minister really has to get his act together to shore up support for the LDP. The LDP is the party of progress, of business, of raising wages, of taking care of childcare, and this is the image that they're trying to promote. But they've got a lot of a lot of things that are against them on every one of those issues that I've just mentioned to you. There's opposition to various aspects of that. So the prime minister is not in really an easy chair. When you consider this prime minister as the longest serving foreign minister, obviously his forte is geopolitics, foreign affairs, relations with other countries, and he's doing really well on that front. Domestically, however, he's not doing very well. So I'd like to get into some of the issues that he's confronting and then wrap it up and then go into exclusively Clubhouse, where we can address the issues that you might have and deal with those on question and answers. And once again, I've said this before, I don't have all the answers, but since I do this pretty frequently, I have a little bit of insight that maybe some people lack. And also there are people in the audience that have greater insight and intel on some of these issues than I or Maya do. And so it's just an enriching conversation. So please join us if you can. So Ueda Kazuyoshi, 71 years old, was nominated by both houses to become the replacement of Haruhiko Kuroda, the governor of the Bank of Japan, who served 2 terms. He was there for 10 years. His term ends on April 6th. Kind of a funny date because usually the fiscal year starts and ends on April 1st, but his term of office ends on April 6th. The appointment of Mr. Ueda is something of an unusual change. So clearly, the prime minister is attempting to step away from Abenomics and the loose money policy, the 2% target, which really escaped Mr. Kuroda, even though he devoted himself over 10 years on reaching that. He started to make real progress over the last half year and then kind of overshot it with inflation now running at about 4%. So apparently some things are not quite working. Mr. Ueda will be the first academic to take the position. In usual fashion, it usually comes, the governor of the Bank of Japan usually comes from one of the deputy governors, or at least a central banker, a prominent central banker, or somebody from the Bank of Japan. That is just the normal pattern. So this is something of a step away. The 2 deputies that have been nominated as well, one is from the Financial Services Agency, the top dog at the Financial Services Agency, so he will go to become deputy director. And then the second one is the chief commissioner for, he's the executive director of the Bank of Japan. So there's something that is to be kept from the old and something that is to be kept for the new. And so a lot of analysts and economists are really holding their breath to see what Mr. Ueda does with, the yield on bonds and the 2% target for inflation and things like this. This is a key appointment from the prime minister. These nominees will be presented to the Diet on, later this month, I believe, on the 24th of this month. So today is what, the 19th. So just this next week, they will be presented to the Diet. And importantly, Mr. Ueda will have an opportunity to speak to both houses. And this will be the first time for him to publicly pronounce what his ideas and his philosophy and his theory is and what his intentions are. I don't expect a whole lot to come out of that, but people are very carefully watching and looking forward to that. He will make his presentation in the morning, and then the 2 deputy directors will make a presentation in the afternoon. So this time next week, we'll have plenty to talk about that. The confirmation is on the 24th. It's a busy day for the prime minister on the 24th because that is also the anniversary of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So there's some other things going on that day. But the prime minister is, he's got plenty of balls in the air. And, we can analyze, what's going on with him. I'm going to push that off a little bit. But in light of the Bank of Japan appointment of the new governor, the trade deficit has hit 3 billion yen just this last month. So the difference between the trade deficit in December and January is enormous. So in December, the trade deficit was at 1.45 billion yen, and the deficit for the first time since 1970 in January was 3.5 billion yen. So this is an increase that is just continuing to increase. Um, um, Collectively, there hasn't been any break in this for the last 18 months. Exports as well have slowed about 3.5%. Most of that was because of chips and chip manufacturing devices. You might remember in our last briefing, we talked about the United States compelling Japan to back off on selling these manufacturing processes for chips and condensers to China. There was a very robust trade going on there. It supported a lot of Japan's export revenue. And the United States says, you've got to stop that. We're stopping it. The Netherlands is stopping it. We just signed a deal for that. So stop selling the high-end manufacturing equipment. So they've done that, and they've taken a hit as a consequence of that. So the Japanese government has to do something to compensate for the manufacturers of these this machinery to other areas, even though TSMC is building a factory here in Japan and in the United States as well. There's still a capacity that China was filling that is not going to be filled if these sanctions continue. So exports slowed to China 17.1% in January, and to the United States 10%, and to the EU 9.5%. This doesn't really paint a very rosy picture for the Japanese economy. We've been talking about this for a while, and the signs are for a global recession coming towards the summer. It's likely that it will be forestalled here in Japan slightly because of the amount of money the Japanese government is pumping into the economy, the supplemental budget from last year in particular. But it will creep in. There's only so much that the Japanese economy can do when exports are not being supplemented by the imports. So the amount of revenue that is being generated is not compensated by the amount of revenue that is going out. So it looks like a very difficult fiscal challenge for the prime minister. So we will watch that very closely too. But it just the main point here is not only do we have a new governor of the Bank of Japan, but the trade deficit is worsening, and the economy with the inflation is beginning to turn more and more sour. There are a couple of things that give us reasons to be hopeful. For example, the wage offensive that is in April, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Another hot topic that has kind of sprung up suddenly is LGBTQ, which is not an item of hot topical interest. It comes up from time to time. But since the executive secretary to the prime minister made some offhanded comments 2 weeks ago, and this comment, I don't want to live near anybody who is LGBTQ. I don't even want to see them. He made these off the record comments, and they were interpreted by the people who were in the room or overhearing it. This conversation was in the prime minister's office, not in the prime minister's office, but in that huge building that is known as the prime minister's office. So it was blurted out, and immediately the prime minister had to fire this young fellow, Mr. Arai. So he's fired from duties with the prime minister, but he's not out of a job. He's just returned back to his typical diet secretary's duties. But it did raise this issue, and it's become a flashpoint, not just for Komeito, who is in support of it, but also for the opposition parties. And we also had the ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, also come out in a public statement saying that he knows the prime minister is going to do the right thing with LGBTQ, and we're going to make this happen. And please, do the best you can. And so there's a lot of momentum there. You can hear the wind, I guess. It's really battering the boat back and forth.
Right.
Is it too distractive?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is too destructive. I would say that the light behind you that is shaking all the way, from left to right is probably more destructive.
That's distracting. Well, that's kind of a barometer of what I'm going through. But
Indeed.
anyway,
Yeah.
yes, maybe I should take it down. Where were we with the LGBTQ? So
Yes.
Japan is the only country in G7 that doesn't have legislation acknowledging same-sex marriages and LGBTQ rights as human rights. And so there is a push now. The prime minister has actually said, thumping his finger on people's chests, I want this done. I want it done by G7. We need to pass this legislation. So in light of everything else that's going on, this issue has come up. And I'm not saying it's a minor issue that doesn't take prominence, but I'm just saying that in light of everything else that's going on, it's just like, gosh, can you give me a bit of a break here? So he has instructed Mr. Hagiuda, who is the policy affairs chief within the LDP, to get it done. The LDP has been dragging its feet. This bill was offered 2 years ago. It had wide support, but the LDP factions within the LDP were against it because they're more reliant on traditional family values. That's what they want to stand for. That's what they want to project. And LGBTQ issues begin or actually rub them a little bit wrong. And so the comments of the executive secretary, one of 7, to the prime minister came at a really bad time. It came as a consequence of the issues being talked about on the diet floor. So it looks like it's going to happen come hell or high water this time. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. As it stands right now, it's not like a zero sum. Everybody knows Shibuya has regulations that allow for same-sex marriages and also for renting and things like that. But all total, there are 255 local governments, 10 of the 47 prefectures in Japan, and 245 municipalities all acknowledge same-sex marriages. So there is progress being made, but I think at the national level, the idea is to have legislation so that Japan falls into the fold of G7. And as you know, there's a lot of that going on, not just with LGBTQ, but with defense spending, with certain economic and cultural things. This banding of these like-minded countries is going full force. You see that with the Philippines and the 5-day trip of the president here, staying until just Saturday of last week. The other thing that's really hampering the prime minister and the economy are wage growth. So with the consumer price index now at 4%, it's drawing down. No matter what the employers do with regard to wages, inflation seems to be eating it all away. So the Organization of Unified Labor Unions has put forth a 5% increase for wages to be going into effect in after April. Keidan Ren, which represents the business interests, so this negotiation kind of is represented. Everybody's kind of represented in the negotiations between these two. They watch them and then calibrate accordingly. For the large companies that are doing major business in Japan, and that's probably around 6 or 8% of the entire economy, the decisions that they make with Keidan Ren and Lengo will be probably 5%, and the fight now is on what consists of that 5%. So not everybody is going to follow in lockstep. The small and medium companies that actually motor Japan are not necessarily going to follow that. They're the ones that are in more trouble than the big companies. And as you know, one of the reasons for the Prime Minister's new capitalism is to release all of this enormous money that has been hoarded, not just by grandma, grandpa, the bubble generation, but also by the companies as they've weathered through this long period of economic decline, not only under Abenomics, but before that, after the bubble years, the economy just continued to tank, and the companies have been hoarding money. And part of the theory of Mr. Kishida's new capitalism is to somehow trigger a release of that, to pump that back into the economy. So the Japanese companies, the big companies, do have reserve funds to pay wages, but they don't want to because it becomes something of a legacy issue for them. If they increase wages by 5%, then they have to keep that level going, and they just don't want to do it. They want to keep as much money as they can. So the issue now, the controversy between labor and big business, is the component of those pay increases. Is it seniority-based wages? Is it a leveling up, or is it a one-time bonus because you've been good and you've been, biding your time? We're going to give you a lot of money now so you can survive this, and then we'll get out of this this doldrum in the economy. So that's where a lot of the controversy is now. Will it be a sustainable wage increase, or will it be something that has a big hit that encourages people, but it doesn't burden the companies long term? And then the other issue is, are the other companies going to follow, the small and medium-sized company? Like I said, the consumer price index is up 4%. This is the highest it's been in 41 years. So addressing the pay scale is a big challenge for the prime minister. We will see more of that coming in April as the Shunto, the wage increase, the wage offensive increases. So with that, we could just wait. There's a lot to be going on before that time, and a lot of challenges with the prime minister. So he might back down, or he might double down, depending on how other things are going in other parts of the political spectrum. With regard to the prime minister, he's almost daily showing up to the Diet. He's on the hot seat. And if it's not him, it's one of his cabinet ministers that needs to describe or explain things that are questioned by the opposition. So the opposition parties have the ability and the obligation to question the administration, and the administration has the obligation to respond. Usually these questions are presented in advance, so they do have some opportunity to prepare for them. But for example, Taro Kono, a favorite topic of conversation with us, the minister of the digital agency, was questioned in the Diet and responded maybe 14 or 15 times. That's not in my area of responsibility. I can't respond to that. These questions are provided in advance, so this is seen as something of a not a dodge, but maybe the questioning was just a little bit too opaque for him to respond. But in any event, the prime minister is on the hot seat almost every day, and in addition to that, he's got foreign visitors. He's got other things that he's got to do. He's got G7 that he's planning. So he's really, we love to talk about him because he's got so many balls in the air. Internationally, he's doing very well. The recognition of Fumio Kishida as Prime Minister of Japan is widespread. He went on a pretty successful tour, 6 countries just this last month. So domestically, he's that reverberate is not being paid back. I mean, the people of Japan don't really acknowledge or reciprocate for his standing internationally because they're focused on the economy, and that's not actually his forte. So domestically, the issues that he's got that are confronting him right now, one of the things is his son's issues. So you might remember that on his tour, his son took one of the embassy cars in a planned effort. This wasn't secret. It wasn't a sneak away, but it was planned. And visited a couple of stores, picked up gifts and souvenirs, took a couple of pictures, didn't visit any sites as a tourist, but still, this caused a big brouhaha when they came back home. So he got criticized for that. He got criticized for hiring his son, for nepotism, for all of these issues. It didn't need to happen, and it was just an irritant. It didn't end there, unfortunately. Then 2 weeks later, Bunshun captured his son going into a love hotel with a 24-year-old university student, and that made a big issue. This sort of thing happens all the time, but when you're the prime minister's son, when you're under a lot of scrutiny like that, it can be interpreted very poorly, and it is, and it was. And then finally, the prime minister. We talked about this a couple of times. You might recall of the prime minister when he went on his 6-day tour to actually make a detour and go visit Zelensky in Kiev. That didn't happen. It was judged as a little bit dangerous and maybe premature, not enough time to plan it out the right way. But the plan more recently was to visit Zelensky in February, make a trip there quickly, get some press on it, show how much Japan is supporting, and then come back quickly. And that was leaked. And the leak is pointed out to be Mr. Kishida's son. That is the story that is being parlayed out now. So that is also very damaging. And then finally, we had the LGBTQ comment by the executive secretary to the prime minister. So these kinds of things in a microcosm, it doesn't really carry a lot of weight. But when you're the prime minister and you've got other fish to fry, these irritants give your enemies lots of ammunition, and so they're to be avoided. In the meantime, he's got Mr. Hagiuda, who is one of the chief, leaders of the former Abeha. It is still known as the Abeha Seiwakai. A leader hasn't been selected there, but Mr. Hagiuda, who is the policy affairs chief of the LDP, very influential, probably in the pecking order, probably number 4 or 5 from the prime minister, is really starting to make a lot of movements. He set up a commission to give another argument to how we're going to pay for defense spending that is different from the prime minister. So he's pitting himself against the prime minister. He's got other issues with regard to LGBTQ, which is a hot issue now, and he makes these statements known. As you know, Seiwakai is the largest political faction, and it looks like Mr. Hagiuda is angling really strongly to be appointed as the leader of that, and it looks like that is going to happen. It's a little bit too early to say, but he's got a lot of momentum behind him, and he's taking positions that are contrary to what the prime minister is taking. So he's not in the cabinet. He's in the LDP. Sometimes he's a team player. Sometimes he's not. He's not the only person that the prime minister needs to worry about, but Mr. Suga, former prime minister, immediately before Mr. Kishida, is also staking claims that are opposite to what the prime minister proposes. And the tensions between the two of them, because Mr. Kishida became prime minister, Mr. Suga didn't. So there's some tension there, but there's some history and some bad blood. They met face to face just this last week. The results of that are inconclusive, but Mr. Kishida knows that Mr. Suga can be very disruptive and damaging to him. So he's trying to mend that fence. I don't know how successful that will be. You've got inflation, as we talked about. You've got the Bank of Japan. The cards are out. We don't know how Mr. Ueda is going to perform in that role. It needs to be dramatically different than it was earlier under Mr. Kuroda. So I think, however you step, it could be a disaster. It could be a hero victory. We just don't know. The trade deficit, as I mentioned, wages, LGBTQ, probably that legislation will go through. Some people will be happy about it. Some people will not. And the child care legislation. The child care legislation has kind of popped up recently. The prime minister has said this is we are going to focus unprecedented energy on child care. And although defense is taking 2% of the GDP, I'm going to push for even more for child care. We need to increase the numbers. It's not just, paying mothers to have another child. It's a whole structure. And if he is going to devote, 2%, 3%, even 4% of the GDP to child care and child services, you've got to imagine that is going to make a dent. A little bit late to the party, but I think this prime minister is really focused on that, and that's one of those things that enhances his brand as he anticipates the elections in May. So a lot is going on with that, and also with Komeito. Komeito is the coalition partner with the LDP. There are real rifts that are going on there. The LGBT issue is one of them. The LDP was dragging its heels on the legislation, and just the relationship between the current administration and Komeito has not been very vibrant. And so I think the prime minister is pushed into a corner to compensate for the lack of vibrancy. He needs to offer concessions to keep that coalition strong and going. So he is going to make concessions in areas where he normally wouldn't want to or wouldn't have the power to, just because he's trying to maintain that relationship. So let me see. The prime minister, as you know, today is the 14th. Today is the 4th. Is that right? The 19th. Today's the 19th. He's got the budget hearing on April 1st. They need to pass that budget on April 1st. They've got the elections on April 26th. So April is going to be incredibly busy. And then the G7 in May. So with all of this going on, it's not unusual that the prime minister would have to visit the hospital just to check his nose. The anniversary of the Russian invasion is on the 24th, this next week. So the prime minister wants to have a digital video conference with all of the G7. He wants to invite Zelensky. Zelensky apparently has accepted. So that's going to be a big deal. That's also the same day that the Bank of Japan nominee presents himself to the Diet as well. Finally, there are a lot of other things that I'd like to talk about, but above and beyond everything else, the cherry blossoms are predicted now to arrive on March 29th in Tokyo. So it comes up the archipelago in a stair-step fashion. It is one of the biggest news items when it finally happens. They've calibrated the full blossom to be on April 29th in Tokyo. The tree that announces that is in Yasukuni Shrine. If you've never been there, if you haven't seen that, there is a tree that is the tree that is authorized to be the tree where it's in full bloom. Then they say it's in full bloom. That will be on the 29th, 3 days earlier than last year. So that's it for me, Maya. There's lots of other things to talk about as I'm being battered about. But with that, I'd like to wrap up today's briefing and go into the Q&A.
Thank you so much for the briefing. Great briefing once again, but we haven't finished, as you said. So let's move to Clubhouse. We have quite a few of our regular listeners there. So, and we already have quite a few comments. Right. Okay. And I have some questions to you. So please don't run away. Please jump into the Clubhouse and let's talk there.
If it was an option. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
You.
Thank you.